properly because we're doing a book in Paris, right? So I'm going to say soyez bienvenue, gentilhomme et dame. Monsieur?
Merci bien.
C'est un grand plaisir.
Bonjour, bonsoir, bienvenue. One of the ways I've been preparing for this book is listening to the News in Slow French, the Journal en Français Facile. Oh, it's a wonderful podcast. We're skipping right into the French language part. Is there more preparation?
No, I could sing the Marseillaise, but I only really do that on the 4th of July, Le 14 Juillet, which is the French national holiday. If we have an event then, I can chant it. But maybe we should start by quoting one of my all-time favorite books, which I memorized as a child. In an old house in Paris, all covered with vines. Come on, guys. Lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines. So Liam has borrowed a copy from the back room, and you could carry on if you wish in English or French.
Excellent. Well, I'm just going to hold forth now, and I was told that I have about 3 hours with you. 3 or 4. Listen to them laugh. They don't know. They don't know. As soon as we run out of tape on the camera. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited because it's snowing in Milwaukee, which is what I now call home. And my family is very pleased for me, actually. I just took a picture of my book poolside over there, just to kind of show that one of the nice things, I do like Kindles, we do sell, but this book, just you can get it wet, and it never needs recharging. Books on paper are a wonderful, wonderful technology. But I did want to tell you a little bit about the book and the genesis of the book and where Madeline came from. So this book, I kind of feel like it's a kaleidoscope book, and so whenever you turn it, you see something new. And so if you turn it one way, it's a mystery. You turn it another way, it's a love story. You turn it still a third way, and it's a story about finding your way through Paris and the Paris myth. And so one of the really interesting things for me was how this book came to be, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and then read a little bit from the book. A very little bit, just to kind of give you a taste of it. But 2 books that I thought that obsessed me as a child, and it sounds like obsessed many of you, or at least the Madeline book, which is one wonderful book by Ludwig Bemelmans. And then another book which people of a certain age, I say, no, but other people, especially very young people, have not heard of The Red Balloon by Albert Maurice. I see nodding people here. So it's also a beautiful film. It was a beautiful film first. And so my idea was, when I was trying to come up with a new novel idea, and it was just I was kind of floating in the air, and I wasn't exactly sure where it would come from. But about 5 years ago, my family, I have 3 daughters. They're all readers. Right now they are, I have no idea how old they are. I did something about a camera for them. They're 18, 15, and 10. Although the reason I paused is because in my mind they're about 6, 4, and 2. Especially when they get behind the driver's seat. Then I get very nervous. But they loved these books, and I made them love them, of course. I made sure to steep them deeply in all their children's literature, so we talked about France all the time. And so one year I was looking for a spring break, because that is something that one needs to do in Milwaukee. And one year, in fact, we did come to Phoenix. We stayed down at the Arizona Grand. It was an impulse buy on Southwest.com at the last second. We just needed to get out of town. The next year was too expensive, and I was trying to figure out, I asked the airline, because I was trying to use award miles, I said, well, where can I go with my award miles? I want to go someplace warm. And they said, well, you can't go anyplace warm, but if you want to go to Paris, I guess you could do that. And I said, really? It's cheaper to go to Paris than it is to go to Florida or Arizona? And that year it was. And so we went. And I decided that I would try to write it up as an article. And the conceit of the article was to let your children lead you around Paris. Instead of using guidebooks, we would in fact use these books. And that's exactly what we did. So I have 3 girls. Each one of them got a book. One got Madeline, one got The Red Balloon, and the third got The Adventures of Hugo Cabret, which is a beautiful book, but doesn't factor into my book here. And so for 5 or 6 days, we crisscrossed Paris, and we just had the most amazing time. The best part was when my 10-year-old, who was then 4 or 5, stood on the Rue de Turenne and kind of put her hands on her hips, and she said, I think I've been here before. And she had. She'd been there in the pages of a book. It was a beautiful thing. On the very last day, my girls are inveterate readers. On the very last day, we were walking through the Marais, the lower Marais, down by the Seine, down the Rue St. Paul, and we passed a bright red bookstore. called The Red Wheelbarrow. And so much did depend on it. It was an English language bookstore, and my girls, who have long confused libraries and bookstores, we pay about an equal amount to each year in fines or sales. We have a rule in our family: anytime you go into a bookstore, you can have whatever you want. It doesn't apply to pony stables or ice cream stores or anything else. But bookstores, my girls always get whatever they want. So they went into this bookstore. They wanted to get books for the flight home, and they flopped down in the children's corner to read. And the store was a mess. It was this old, decrepit store, and it was just piles of things all over the place. And I found a couple really, really priceless old things from some old Hemingway and some Fitzgerald, and I brought them up to the counter where the woman was kind of eyeing us all sadly. And she said, "No, you can't have those." And I said, "Well, why can't I have them?" And she said, "Because those are my books. I'm actually packing up the store because I think I need to close. My daughter's moved away. She's all grown up. You know, she used to be a little like your daughters and help in the store, but she's all grown up now, and so it's just me, and I think I need to close." And she kind of looked at us for a while, and she said, "Would you like to buy the store?" Now, I don't know if anyone else here is an oldest child. My wife and I are both oldest children, and we are very responsible people. So, unfortunately, we were the last people to ask to run a bookstore in Paris. And we thought about it, though. We had a long walk back to the metro, and we had a very long conversation about whether or not we could pull this off. And for a variety of technical reasons, and more fundamentally bank account reasons, we realized we couldn't. But as we got down in the metro, I realized that I hadn't gotten a book from the store. And then a few months later, when I decided I might be time to write a new novel, I sat down at my computer and realized that I had gotten a book from the store, which is Paris by the Book. So the shorthand description of this is that in real life, we didn't buy the store, but in the book, I take her up on it. It's not entirely true. In the book here, it's actually about a woman who lives in Milwaukee, and she's married to a writer. My family gets very nervous when I do the synopsis because the husband, the writer, disappears without a trace. The police think he's died. In fact, we were at the Culver's, the fast food chain restaurant, a couple weeks ago, and we were going through the drive-thru, and I got out of the car to throw something away, and one of my daughters said, "Daddy's getting away!" So they're a little nervous, but don't worry, kids. If you're watching at home, I'm coming back. Although it is really sunny here. And they find a clue or two. After a while, the police are convinced he's dead, and so are they, but they find a clue or two that leads them back to Paris. And one of the things that I did put into the book from real life is that the family is obsessed with Ludwig Bemelmans and Albert Maurice. One of the interesting things I did, and then after I tell you a little bit about the two authors, then I'm going to read from a little bit. Do we have the rhythm of things here?
You're good.
I'm doing good. Okay. I'm going to sing too at some point. One of the things I started when I realized that these were going to be the twin poles of the book, Ludwig Bemelmans and Albert Maurice, I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn more about each of these artists, and each of them turned out to be fascinating, if not crazy individuals. Now, Ludwig Bemelmans, sunny, bright, happy, simple children's book author, of course not at all. He was actually quite a character, a famous raconteur. He was very much into hotels and hospitalities. He actually ran a couple of restaurants for a while. He worked at the Ritz. He exiled himself from Europe. He says in one part of his memoirs that he shot someone, or maybe he missed shooting someone, but he had to escape. And then he was fired from the Ritz, and he took the velvet rope from the Ritz home, and he was using it as a banister in this miserable little house that he had in Queens. And he writes then, he's like, well, he looked down at the rope one day, he said, I could hang myself with that. This is a very dark story, but just a few days later, he saw the famous children's book editor, May Massey, and she encouraged him, and he sold his first drawings in his first children's book. And then in 1939 came the wonderful Callanan series. He was, throughout his life, continued to publish in a wide variety of ways, and he was something of a tortured artist because he really wanted, he loved these books. I mean, they made him good money, but he really wanted to be respected as a serious oil painter. And so he would work in France, he would work back in the States, but what he really wanted most was to have an oil painting exhibition, which he did at the end of his life. But before that, he got distracted in many ways, including on one of them, and this will be significant a little bit later on in my story. He bought a bar in Paris. So if you've been to New York, there's a wonderful bar in the Carlisle Hotel called the Bemelmans Bar, which has his original murals. But while he was in Paris, before that, he bought a bar on a street called the Rue de Cologne, the Street of the Dove. So put a little bookmark there. Now we have Albert Maurice. So he won the Academy Award for this film, Best Screenplay in 1957, even though there was only about 30 words in the entire script. The film itself is about 33 minutes long, and he also won a Palme d'Or at Cannes, although not the top prize, which he lost out to Jacques Cousteau. But Maurice was a really restless soul himself. He invented the board game Risk, if you've ever heard of it, which always surprises people to hear that. And he died at the end of his life in a very, very strange way. He kind of never had the success that he had with the Red Balloon. And at the end of his life, which was a very young life in his 40s, the Shah of Iran, the last Shah, called him up and said, could you make a documentary about Iran being a modern country? And Maurice hemmed and hawed and said, okay, I'll do it. So instead he shot this kind of National Geographic winds-up tableaus, animals, Bedouin tribesmen roaming around. Nothing at all that the Shah wanted. The Shah wanted his hydropower dam. That is what he wanted. But Maurice had had a dream that he was going to drown, which made no sense, and the Shah said, no, get in my own personal helicopter with my own personal pilot, just shoot a couple glamour shots of the dam, come back, slap it on the film, it was going to be awful, and slap it on the film and go from there. Well, sure enough, they flew up there, they tangled in the wires, and if I have the story straight, I'm not 100% on this, they fell out of the helicopter into the dam. Also on board that same helicopter, and the only person who made it to safety was Pascal, his son, who then had to drive all the way back to Tehran and call home and tell his mom what had happened. So he died incredibly young. The restored film, actually, he and his mother worked on the film for 8 years, and it won an Academy Award for Best Documentary long after the Shah had been deposed. One of the remarkable things, and I actually have an Iranian film student who's working on this for me, so I believe I can say this with authority. The helicopter, if you can believe this, is still hanging in those wires. They left it up there as a memorial to the filmmaker. He's actually quite treasured in that. So both of these guys, in other words, have these amazingly deep lives as artists, which really informed my story, because I thought no artist is really what they seem to be on the surface. I am. I'm sunny and happy all the time. Other artists, on the hand, not so much. And there's one beautiful story about Ludwig Bemelmans, or kind of a haunting story. So he had this tiny little bar in the shadow of Notre Dame. It was so decrepit and the plumbing never worked, so on opening night he actually booked 2 limousines. One of them said Mesdames and one said Monsieur, which was, so in other words, the limousines would take you to nearby apartments to go to the restroom because the plumbing never worked in his bar. But in the year 1200, the building is extremely old. In the year 1200, that building actually fell down. And the reason that the street is called the Street of the Dove is because there was a husband and wife, a pair of doves, 2 mates, who were living up in the eaves of the building. And one day, the wife was off getting food for the 2 of them, I guess, flying around Paris. And she came back, and then she saw this building lying in destruction beneath her. And of course, her husband, the male dove, was somewhere in the wreckage. And so the legend goes that she circled that building for weeks, and then months, and then years, hoping that he would fly up out of the wreckage. And I thought, maybe there's a story there. So with that, I'm going to read from the very beginning of this book. Now you're going to have to suspend your disbelief just a little bit, because the narrator of this book is Leah. She's about 42 years old, and she's a woman, and neither of those things are true of me, if that hasn't become clear yet. I mean, I'm 42. I'm 37. No, I'm not that. But among the many lies I'll tell tonight, you just have to kind of believe that this is Leah who's going to do this. So she's moved to Paris. This is the beginning of the book, and she's kind of has a little bit of magical thinking. I'm not going to introduce it anymore because it's a prologue, but after that I'd be happy to take questions or do whatever.
I have some.
You do? Okay.
I do.
Can I do the reading now, or should
Absolutely.
I? All right. Once a week, I chase men who are not my husband. I should not, but there are many things I do that I should not. Smoke, own a bookstore, pay for French lessons I always find ways to skip, and this is one. I walk my daughters to school, stare past the parents staring past me, and start my search for that day's man. I've sometimes begun right there on the sidewalk, trailing a fellow parent, a father, as he frees himself from the clutch outside the massive school door. More frequently, I walk up to the teeming Rue Saint-Antoine and sift the passing crowd. Some mornings I find someone to chase right away. Some mornings it takes all morning. Some mornings I follow someone for a while, usually someone just like my husband, or as close as I could manage or bear, the ink-black hair, the narrow shoulders, the hands that can't stay in their pockets, the head that can't stop turning every way but mine, only to lose interest when some errant detail distracts. My husband would never wear blue glasses. My husband would never not yield a taxi to a pregnant woman. My husband would never steal a magazine from a newsstand, an apple from a greengrocer, a book from a bouquiniste. My husband would never, and I saw this on one of my forays, kiss a woman, not his wife. Some mornings I find no one, and this always surprises me, no one to chase, though I suppose what should surprise me more is all those other mornings when everything is right, when I find a man within a half-kilometer of wandering, when I'm able to follow him for a good long while. Following these men is more difficult, or it should be more difficult than it is, but it's not. Paris is a crowded city, far more so than travel ads and posters portray. And I, well, although I'm fit, have long legs, helplessly project the stay-away vibe men adore. I am 42, roughly twice the age of any woman who interests men here. So be it. Invisibility suits me, serves me. It can become awkward, though, if the man that I'm pretending to chase pursues smaller streets, narrower streets. On the busy boulevards, I've trailed someone as close as a meter or two behind, close enough to see the thickness of his hair, my husband's hair so thick. Smell his cologne, my husband none, not ever. Taste the smoke coming off his clothes if he smoked. My husband, when he smoked, always lied about doing so, and I always uncovered the lie the same way, a scent, a sniff, but still a reminder that yes, he could lie. On the quieter streets, I will let the distance stretch a block or more. I'll ponder what I would really do if it were my husband up ahead. Embrace him, take up his hand, hold tight as I kick him, cuff him, ask him why, and what, and where. But it's not him, it's never him. So I study the shops, I study my phone, I read the historical markers, and put any man I'm chasing at ease. C'est juste un autre touriste perdu. Once, and only once, a man I followed confronted me. This was 6 months after we'd first arrived, not so long ago, long enough. I was different then, so was Paris. Still, I should have known. I did know. I'd known he was going to be trouble from the very start because he looked too much like my husband. Same hair, same glasses, same smile. He gave that smile to a woman at the Apple store beneath the Louvre, which is almost as popular as the museum above. And that was what caught my eye, that lopsided grin. I didn't even see it was my husband's doppelganger until I did, and then I couldn't not chase him. Out from under the Louvre he climbed, and then he took the wonderful Passage Richelieu, which goes out through the Louvre into the world. It's a colonnaded pedestrian tunnel that burrows through the French sculpture galleries. Glass walls allow passers-by a free peek with no lines. He didn't look. I couldn't not, but pausing made me almost lose him, and I had to skip a step or two to catch him as he exited, crossed the street, and started north along the Rue de Valois. And now I set before him another test. If he turned right towards the Banque de France, I would drop him immediately. If left into the Palais Royal, the place where Audrey Hepburn is pursued in charade, if it's charade or charade, as she would pronounce it, with its gorgeous gardens and stately rows of trees that I might weave among, I would follow. He turned left, so did I. He walked faster. I tried not to. On, and I thought we would go all the way to Montmartre, and I thought I will follow him all that way too, because even I will admit that Paris is a theater, ornate, gilded, if worn at the edges, and to live here is to spend most of your time waiting outside to get in, or once in, to wait, staring at the stage, waiting, wondering what the rich red curtain will reveal. And then something happens, the lights dim, people hush, something somewhere stirs, and you know the show is finally about to start. I'm talking about the drifts of flowers cascading from window boxes high above the hidden side street, or the busy museum corridor where you realize a statue is staring right at you, just at you, and that its still smile is still sly after centuries. Or the meal where the simplest ingredients on the plate before you, perhaps you made it yourself following the ebullient butcher's instructions to the letter, combined to best in one bite anything you've eaten before. You wait and wait for the curtain to rise, precisely because you don't know when it will, where it will, or what will appear. A man, say, your husband. This chase today could take a while, I thought, and before I could think another thought came a voice. Oui. I had not paid attention. I had bumped right into my quarry. Oui, madame? He stood too close. His breath smelled sharp. Pedestrian dogs, deliverymen, trottinettes swirled around us, rocks in a river. No, I said, no, when I should have said, I'm sorry, and in English, so that he would know I was stupid. But I've had more practice with non than any other word in France, and so he took me for a local. His voice fell a register as he asked in French, what was I doing following him? Here's what I did not say. That I had lost my husband. That I had spent the first months going through all the stages, various pamphlets and websites, and too many books said I would go through. Shock, denial, bargaining, guilt, anger, despair. Except that I cycled through them repeatedly, rapidly, never quite making it to the acceptance stage invariably promised. Until I did make it to that final stage, or rather I came to accept something else, that the temporary situation I found for my family running a Parisian bookstore we live above could or had become permanent. And so began some new stages, French stages, which like everything else over here can feel analogous to things American but turn out to be different. In America, you see a man who resembles your husband and you smile sadly to yourself. In France, you chase him. In America, you think, well, of course you're curious, it's like an unfinished book. In France, I knew it was because of an unfinished book. In America, you say, I lost my husband, and everyone thinks they know what you mean. In France, they know better. When I say, I lost him, they don't say, I'm so sorry. They say, where did he go? And so when I answered the man I've been chasing, I spoke quietly and clearly, and I told him what I told the police when I was still talking to the police. I said, I'm looking for my husband. What I did not say next, because at the time of this story, my story, I could not yet have known, I did not say, my husband is looking for me. I'll leave it there.
So when I was asked to do this event and read the book, I thought it was a very interesting choice about how to start this book. And one of the questions I ask my authors, and frequently we talk about with authors who come to visit us, is where does the story begin? Because that's one of the, as an editor, I can tell you that very often where the story begins in the finished book is not where the story began when I got the book, because it doesn't necessarily track. Some stories unfold chronologically, some stories, are flashbacks, all kinds of things. So basically, you have set up your protagonist as a stalker, even if you've given her a really great reason for doing it. So were you trying to give her a mission? Are you taking us on a tour of Paris? Are you setting up her emotional state so we understand why she's there? It seems like a multi-purpose prologue.
It is. It's all those things, and even more, it's also a wink at a book, which is something that goes. This is also a book about books. There's many books mentioned here, and there's a famous French performance artist and author named Sophie Calle, who wrote a book called Suite Venetienne, Venetian Suite, where she actually, in that book, actually follows a man through Paris all the way to Venice. At one point in the story, there's kind of a wink that someone calls the story looking for that book. But one of the things I wanted to show with that prologue is that she has become, and this is, for my experience, I haven't lived in Paris, but I've been there many times, and my experience of expat life is that there's a certain amount of magical thinking that goes along with it. It's like walking through a landscape in a spacesuit. Like you are interacting with the environment, but you're also quite separate from that environment at the same time. And I thought one of the interesting things I could show with that prologue is how she moves very fluently and fluidly through Paris, but she's also just kind of pretending to be there. She's kind of pretending to look for someone. She can't really, but she is almost, and so she wants to be. She can't actually find her husband just by wandering on the streets, but she wants to try that way.
Well, you've given her kind of carapace,
Yes.
that cloaks her in a way while she's doing all this. I also thought it was extremely interesting. Paris is littered with bookstores. There's librairie, there's the bouquiniste, there's the whole thing. A lot of us think of Shakespeare Company,
Yes.
magical, iconic bookstore and so forth. Why did you choose to make the bookstore she ends up buying devoted to dead authors?
Yeah, well, that was so the bookstore that she buys, and she renames it the late edition, which good. I'm glad you like it. The person that she buys the store from in the book doesn't like the doesn't like the name. So that's kind of a running joke of the book. The reason that I made it late authors was in part because the bookstore that we bought, I just realized, was full of dead authors. And so I thought there was something about the fact, and especially because she's looking for her husband, and the police think that he's dead, and so that was kind of in the air. And then also, I was worried about name checking too many. I have so many author friends that I thought they would all be upset if I didn't mention them in the book. So I make a few exceptions. Judy Blume, who's alive and well, I hope forever, she's mentioned in the book, and Alice Madison, who's a writer that not enough people know about. I'm a big fan of hers. She's in there. But otherwise, I decided it would be more expedient for the bookstore to specialize in those things, but also would kind of suffuse kind of the air. I mean, one of the interesting things that we discover when we have thought about buying the store is that French subsidizes its bookstores, its French language bookstores. And so to run an English language bookstore, you get nothing. So in the book, they run a tiny little French language children's bookstore inside the English language bookstore, kind of a wink-wink operation. And that also allowed me to riff on children's books, French children's books, which are amazing and terrifying and quite frightening. But there's one called Emergency Room Clown, where the emergency room surgeon is a clown. I mean, they could never take a child to hospital again. So anyway, so those authors are all alive. But otherwise, that's a little bit where the genesis of that came from.
I thought it was wonderful. I just, found it a fascinating choice. When we think of Paris, I think we often think about little boutique-y kinds of things, whether it's clothes or whether it's food or whether it's a bakery or some kind of a book emporium or so forth. That's one of the joys of an old and large city like that, is that over centuries, this sort of thing has accrued, which Europe, as you probably have read, is doing its best to fight back against American tech giants who would like to level a lot of that. And I'm going to be really interested to see how they do. I read today that the Missouri Attorney General has decided to take whatever standard the French are holding Amazon to, or whoever companies, and they're going to apply them in Missouri. So we'll see how that works out.
Theoretically, there's a law. I've been told by French authors that it's not necessarily 100% observed, but there's a law that books are only allowed to be, new books can only be discounted 5%.
Well, there was, in England, when I first opened the store, there was an actual net book agreement which leveled the field, and it was, I think, a maximum of 5, and that held true until almost 2000, I think. So the British didn't do discounting, and a lot of European countries don't. And there's interesting support levels. For example, if you're an author and live in Ireland, you don't pay any income tax. They have various ways to, foster the arts and
I'll be right back.
Make things. Yeah, great. Yes, years ago, Rob and I were going to Ireland. My husband and I were going to Ireland, and John Connolly, who's a wonderful writer, said he volunteered to plan our trip. And Rob had seen John Connolly, and he said to me, "You really sure? John's going to plan our trip." So our first stop was at Ashford Castle, which, if you know anything about Ashford Castle, is one of the most wonderful hotels in the world. Their motto, I love this, excellence since 1228. And now I get gorgeous cards from them in the email that we've never been back. So you don't know where all of this is, going to go. But I do think other countries, in their own ways, different ways, have supported writing in the arts and bookstores and so forth. And as you say, the printed book is a technology that's been going on, a codex, actually. You all know the difference between a scroll and a codex. The scroll was what you used to get in a fax machine, remember? And it's really hard to read, so you cut it up into pieces. A codex is when the pieces of paper are all cut up and bound together, however that happens to work out. And it really is a great technology, better than cuneiform on clay tablets or all that sort of thing.
This, I'm not sure if I mentioned, this is my own childhood copy of the Red Balloon.
Cool.
My godmother gave this to me in 1975. And like I said, it's never needed charging since.
Good. I'm wanted to ask you a question about your book. Was Liam was an Edgar nominee back in the day for a book he wrote called Cloud Atlas. Although they put a "the" in here, and I understood the difference between David Mitchell's "The Cloud Atlas" and your book Cloud Atlas was the absence of the article.
It's the other way around.
It's the other way around. Well, I screwed up. Okay. So his is called Cloud Atlas, and yours is The Cloud Atlas.
Which is the wisdom of editing. So if anyone's a writer here, just know you should always cut. Like if I had only cut "the" out of my title, I probably would have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize too. But
the Booker Prize instead of the Edgar. All right. So as it happens, the territory that you're exploring in this book is Alaska.
Yes.
So what drew you to Alaska? I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing, Alaska to Paris, right? So why not?
I do like, I'm a little bit like Harold in the Purple Crayon, not to use all children's book metaphors tonight, but if you know that. I mean, Harold draws his way forward to go places, and I do that at the keyboard. I'm very interested in traveling places, and I sometimes travel a little bit farther than I myself have traveled, and then I use the books to get myself there. So when we had this idea to put this book in Paris, I would write my book there, and then we sold the book, and I used some of that money to go back and travel. But the book, the Cloud Atlas, set in Alaska. Alaska was also a place I'd always wanted to visit, and so I thought, well, I'll set a book there. And I remember when I sold that book, or when I got an agent to take it on, she said, "I love this book. I just have one question: how long have you lived in Alaska?" And I said, "Actually, I've never been." And she said, "Well, you're gonna have to fix that." And I said, "Well, you sell the book, and then I'll take the money and go." And she did, and I did, and I actually didn't have to change too much because I had done a lot of research. I subscribed to. I joined the NPR affiliate in remote Bethel, Alaska. They told me to come by the station and pick up the mug because they didn't realize that I was so far away. And a great moment. It's actually where Corey Flintoff, NPR fans, it's where Corey Flintoff got his start in radio station KYUK. But in any case, this book is about the very end of World War II when Japan did this very strange thing and they tied bombs to paper balloons that were full of hydrogen and floated them across the ocean. And my book is about a guy who was in charge of going around and finding those balloons and hushing up any evidence of them, which was very much an ongoing project because the United States didn't want Japan to know that the balloons were actually reaching the United States. And there's a wonderful Air Force colonel who, after the war, lovingly went through and detailed the landing site of every single balloon. And he noted what they found at every site. And so some shrapnel, pieces of paper, and then in one particular site, 40 miles northwest or northeast of Bethel, Alaska, it said, "Found in the wreckage was a postcard in a boyish hand in Japanese by a young boy to his father." And I thought, well, now there might be a story there. I think the official idea was that they were using children to stuff sandbags at the time, and so maybe the kid put a kind of a message in a bottle sort of thing. But I had other ideas for it. And so that once I had that, Bethel, Alaska, then I suddenly decided that's where the book needed to be. But you should be very careful if you go camping in the Northwest because they've only found 300 of these balloons, but they launched 10,000 of them.
So this book was nominated for the Oscar of Mystery called The Edgar after Edgar Allan Poe. So why do you think it was perceived as a mystery?
Because I yell at Waldman. Believed it was a mystery. No, one of the things I had heard was that the book had certain fans in the mystery community, but it wasn't necessarily an intentional mystery. I mean, there is a mystery where the balloons are coming from, and then also I can't really tell much more about the mystery, but there's people who come and go, and like who's actually behind the sort of thing. And I've given you a little bit of a teaser about that postcard that was found. And so there are some clues that you have to put together, but it's not necessarily a detective story in the traditional sense. But it is nevertheless like there's a path you have to follow. Much like Paris, like by the book, is not a necessarily traditional mystery, but she also has to follow clues throughout the book to find out where she's going.
One of the really great things about, I call it the crime fiction now, I don't really call it mystery, is what a huge umbrella it is. It embraces so many kinds of stories. And so many, there's some espionage in here, or at least, that kind of thing. It's an enormously broad umbrella, so, to think that it all has to be Agatha Christie is a mistake. It doesn't really work that way.
No, absolutely not. I grew up, I subscribed to Ellery Queen magazine, all throughout high school.
So where else do you want to visit? Because this will give us a clue what you might write next.
Yeah, my next book is going to be called Scottsdale, It's Warm.
We're going to bring him back in July, though, so that will cure him, right?
That is fine. I live in a 1910 wood frame house insulated with newspaper in Milwaukee. So you turn on the furnace and you probably get some of that heat down here. It just goes right out of the house. So even July for a little while. But I think my next books, I've got a couple different ones that I'm contemplating right now. Actually, one's a nonfiction book and one's a fiction book. The fiction book is currently headquartered a little bit closer to home. It's about some siblings. The parents are not present at all in that text. It's just the kids who are growing up and trying to figure out a mystery that happened with their father. And so I guess mystery is coming up again. And then even more mysterious is a nonfiction book that actually earlier today I was down in Tucson researching at the Pima Air and Space Museum. Did I pronounce that correctly? Yes. Lester Maitland was the first man to fly to Hawaii, and he's from Milwaukee. He did it at the same time as Lindbergh, just about 4 or 5 weeks later. And they were celebrated equally at the time because, among other things, Hawaii, much harder to reach than France, much smaller target. And so, but no one remembers Lester Maitland, in part because after a series of odd and kind of unfortunate eddies in his life at 50, he decided he would leave it all behind him, his life as a pilot, and he became an Episcopal priest. And he lived almost another 50 years like that. So it's an interesting story. It's a Milwaukee story, and they had some records down there in Tucson, so I looked them up. So I've got a couple different things going, but they both have a mysterious element to them. So
I have one final question before we open it up. Many of you who are here on a regular basis know that we have other authors who write to us about France. Martin Walker, Bruno, Chief of Police, one of our best-selling series of all time, will be back on June 18th. And the next night, Cara Black wanted to come with her new Paris mystery, but I thought it was really unwise to have them back-to-back. So with some maneuvering, I moved her to the weekend so you can have a little break between the two. But in their books, especially in Martin's books, it's very difficult not to drink the wine and eat the food and just kind of get lost in the entire sort of French lifestyle and so forth. And I didn't know that you were quite so interested in the food and wine, but maybe you are.
No, it's interesting actually. There's a wine club that's actually has named this book as their book club pick. So for those of you interested in Wink Wine, WINC, they're selling this wine. They're sending some. I'm sorry it didn't happen tonight, but apparently one of the future bookstores out in California is going to get a shipment of this wine, so I can report to that because it does go very well with a glass of wine. At one point,
no, I didn't mean it didn't go well with one, but some.
In the middle of the book, they they have quite an epic meal at a French restaurant, which is based a little bit on an epic meal that my wife and I had. We had the most wonderful sommelier experience I've ever had. So. There was, first of all, it was a female sommelier, which you don't see enough of, and my daughters all now aspire to that, because they're like, yes, here's what we do. But this woman came out, the sommelier came out, and we said, please, we just gave her a budget and said, you bring in the wine, and so she did. And then she brought it out, and then she poured the little glass, for me to sample, and I reached for it, and she looked at me like, no. And she took it, and she sampled it. She's like, yes, it is good.
I asked this question in part because I am married to a man that when we plan to go to France, he faxes ahead to the various restaurants that he plans to eat in. I mean, he's really serious about this. And at one point, we were at Michel Brown's restaurant in the wilds of the Auvergne. This is the guy that invented the molten chocolate cake. He's a 3-star Michelin cook, and his knives are famous. So if you're going to eat there, you also have to stay there because it's in the middle of nowhere. So if you're not going to drink anything, you can leave, but otherwise you don't need to. It's such an. We go to markets too. We lived in the Dordogne for 5 weeks. We swapped house with an author. So the author lived in our house here and wrote a book, and we lived in his house there. And the markets were the whole thing, and it was strawberry season. So you would go to the various markets and there would be like little regional strawberries, and they all tasted different. It was absolutely fabulous. So for me, it's very hard, even though, I love the books. I can't really think of France without thinking about, the whole market to table, the, locavore thing, and
the daily shopping. It is funny, like one thing in the book that does come up, which is anathema to, true gourmands, but they're addicts of a French frozen food chain called Picard.
Right.
And so they go to Picard quite a bit. Because I have it on the best of like all the Parisian people I told, none of them would admit it at first, but then they said, well, actually, yes, we use Picard all the time, and the restaurants do too. But it's gorgeous. If you go, now the French tourist board is going to throw me in jail for saying this. If you go and you stay in an apartment, you have to try it. The stores are all over. The food is amazing. It looks exactly like the package. It's bright and colorful. It's like no frozen food you've ever had. And the last time I was there in the hotel, and I explained to them I was researching and I actually needed to try some frozen food, and they looked at it, oh, monsieur. But then they said, okay, we already have some. So they so it's amazing. Please go to like the really nice restaurant. We're big fans of Restaurant Spring. Have you ever been there? It's wonderful. It's actually a Chicago chef. And he now is an empire. It's absolutely wonderful. It's in the first. It's right in the middle of everything, right off the Rue de Rivoli. So I definitely recommend that. But for the rest of us, frozen food.
So for the benefit of tourists here, or people who might want to travel in France, is Paris sort of a prisoner of le midi, like much of the rest of the country? By much I mean everything stops for lunch. You have to plan your visits to museums and all kinds of things around. I once dragged Rob all the way up to, where were we? Limoges, to see the museum. It's open from 10:15 to noon, or 2:30 to 4:30. So if you don't allow for that, you can be completely frustrated. But I'm not sure that in the cities that is so rigidly followed.
In Paris, it is not. I mean, depending on the place, I find the rule is if you really want to go there, then yes, it's closed. But, otherwise, I mean, Paris, because the tourism is so important to them, they actually stagger the hours. And
right.
When you go to the more kind of recondite, the more obscure places, I've definitely experienced that before. But otherwise, Paris itself. But when you get outside of Paris, then you have to, or it's very difficult to eat on Sunday. For example, because the shop will close up. We actually stopped in our last trip. We stopped in Dijon, and we had a heck of a time trying to find out where to eat on a Sunday night, because they was like, I've sent everyone home. It's Sunday. And it was like, we're not, It's like, and he didn't offer us any frozen food because they weren't theirs. But I think with enough tenacity, you can find a place to eat.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank our Facebook office. Where's Miles? Our Facebook audience for, no, we're not doing Facebook. I forgot. We're doing live stream tonight. Whoa. Sorry. You can watch this program tonight should you have missed anything if you go to poisonpen.com, and on the homepage there's above the bar it says live stream and podcast and various other things, so you can click on live stream. Why don't you see if the audience would like to ask questions?
I'd be happy to answer. Yes.
I read Cloud Atlas. And so when the movie came out, I was very excited, and I went to the movie and watched the movie. And then I came out of the movie and I thought, I don't remember any of those scenes. So could you tell me why not?
Which one you read mine or you read his?
Yours. I read yours.
Right. No, that is a big problem, especially for me on Amazon. So please go on Amazon and just give me 5 stars for charity, because I have a lot of people who go on Amazon, they're very upset because they see the movie and like, this was nothing like the book. That's because the movie's about a different book. So my book is set in Alaska. David Mitchell's book is set kind of everywhere, globally in the universe. And his works in a completely different way. And famously, and somewhat aggravatingly, I have to say, he said that his book was unfilmable. And I like that they tried it anyway, but I have always said about my book that it is filmable. And that hasn't really closed the deal. One problem with it, we had an agent early on, a film agent who was interested in it. He said, yeah, but snow is really expensive. I said, but the book takes place in the summer in Alaska for precisely this reason. Like, I just didn't want to do too much like snow writing. And he said, yeah, but Alaska, people are going to want snow. And snow is diapers, and you got to shred the diapers, and you do it in London because that's the only way you make snow. So if you actually just saw Black Panther, you can, if you look really closely, that's shredded diapers that's going on.
Wow, there's disillusion right there.
The romance of all those Hallmark Christmas
I know,
movies.
sorry. I told them, I said, if you go to Alaska, they need the money. Like they would do the snow for free. But, no. So that's why the two things differ. Because there's a completely, my book is completely different from his.
We should add, for those of you who might be confused about this, titles are not copyrightable. 18 people could have written a book called Cloud Atlas and called it that at the same time. So it is a problem. Generally, publishers try to avoid that because it does lead to confusion, but you've probably found yourself looking for other kinds of books and all that you run into 2 or 3 different titles. So you have to be really careful, especially if you're shopping online, that you actually get the book that you want rather than a similarly titled but completely different book or a movie.
Don't be too careful because we sell a ton of books by mistake. It's fantastic.
I think The Girl from the Train turned into an accidental bestseller.
Yes, yeah.
I can't remember. It had this different, the girl. There was one slight difference in the pronoun. I can't remember which one it was, but she got an extraordinary number of sales based upon that.
And just to clarify, we came out at the same time. So we came out at the same time on different sides of the ocean. So there was no one really played traffic cop with the publisher and say like, wait a second. So because some people are like, he just named his book like. I was like, no, actually there's a book of poetry that also does very well, which is called Cloud Atlas. And I, in a sense, stole my title because I actually got the idea for the title from the National Oceanographic Administration, Atmospheric Administration, because they publish an annual Atlas of Clouds. And I saw it in a government depository once, and I thought, what a ridiculous enterprise, because I thought it was an atlas, like they were trying to map clouds. And in fact, it's more like an almanac of clouds, like this is what this one looks like. And but I thought it was just such a wonderful poetic image that I thought, well, I'll just borrow it from them. But as it turns out, a lot of people were borrowing it. So.
Questions over here? Because we sort of have our back to you. Anybody over here have a question?
I was curious why you chose to write it from the woman's point of view. It seems like there's a lot about this that's personal to you.
Yes. I had actually written the book in third person earlier, and I got about 20,000 words in, and then I got blocked one day, and I just wasn't sure what to do, and so I used some advice that I often tell my students, which is to, just switch point of view for a little bit and let one of the characters talk for a while, and then you'll be back on track. And so the wife was by far the most interesting character of that first chunk. And so when I started letting her talk, she basically never stopped.
That's a metaphor in there somewhere.
She took over the story, and so once she did, then we were off to the races. And it's actually my second book with a female narrator. My second novel, All Saints, also had one. I just follow the voice wherever it comes from. So it's funny. Not as many people ask me like how I could write as a 78-year-old celibate priest who's the narrator of Cloud Atlas, but also a reach for me, I just want to say. Other questions? Yes.
So another process question. I love that you bring in the children's books, but your research seems amazing. How do you know when to stop researching and keep writing and start writing? Well, keep writing. I'm sure you research all the way through, but how does that work? All that research and then all the writing.
That is a great question, and if you find out the answer, please. I'm asking
you.
Okay. I like a research book just because I like to learn something over the course of reading a book. I just like to kind of acquire some. That's just the way my mind works, and so it's also a wonderful procrastinatory activity. And so all my books have actually involved a good bit of research. As for when to stop, I think if you are becoming too beholden to what you're researching, you have to break out from it. And so there were certain places in this book where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to follow Ludwig Bemelmans all the way down this hole. At one point, like for example, on the sign, there's a plaque outside his little bar there, which is no longer his bar, it's gone through many hands, but going all the way back to 1200, they have all of the different owners of the bar, and they say why each owner quit the bar. It's a very kind of French black. And Ludwig Bemelmans, I knew why he had closed the bar. He'd kind of gone bankrupt and gone out of business. Or I thought I knew that. I'd read his memoir. Then I read the plaque, and it said that he had closed, or had sold the bar à cause de chagrin d'amour, which is a heartbreak. And he'd had his heart broken, and he'd had an affair, I found out. And this was like, I was like, I can't have this in the book. So at this point in the book, when I got to that, you'll see, and those of you who read it already know this, they mention the chagrin d'amour, but then they retreat from, I don't go down that rabbit hole, because I realized that that's another story that I wasn't ready to tell. So it's just a matter of kind of, not just, but it's a matter for me at least of knowing ultimately what my story's about. In the first draft, I let everything and everybody in. So this book is about 100,000, just under 100,000 words, but I probably wrote 300,000 easily. And I'm sure many of the authors on these shelves. And certain authors, T.C. Boyle told me he writes word to word. He types a word, types a word. I can't do that. I have to kind of put all the clay on the wheel and then just start taking everything away that's not a pot. But I don't know what I'm making until I finished it.
There are other authors who are a different technique, is to write the story and you just put brackets or some sort of thing in where you need to find something out. And that is a different way of keeping too much research from getting into your story.
Yeah.
You know, so there are all kinds of different ways to do it.
Yes.
It sounds like this was a very personal book for you. I'm wondering how your daughters reacted to it and if it rang true for them.
That is a really interesting question. Like I said, they did joke the other day when I got out of the car and said, like, Daddy's running away. And they noticed immediately that there's only 2 daughters in the book. And so they're kind of joking with each other about which one of them is not in the book. I do want to say, like, it's hard, like, they know this, but it's been interesting to talk. I mean, one of the things actually that the book is explicitly about is about blurring the lines between reality and fiction. It's actually one of the topics of the book itself. There's a book that's getting written in the book, and so that was of interest to me. And so I do try whenever I can to emphasize that these characters are actually nothing like the people in real life. Like, these daughters are nothing like my own daughters, who are really very sweet and gentle and love reading. The oldest child here is a terror, and the youngest child, less of a terror, but still not anything like my own girls. But they are very curious about it, and for right now at least, they're very proud that Dad's written a book, and they kind of like going around and saying that they're in the book. My dad, for example, always said that he was there's a terrible officer in this book who's just an awful person. And my dad always says, like, well, that's based on me, which his friends told me. He never told me that. So, I mean, one of the things I think that a joke that a lot of authors have is that everybody who thinks that they're in your book isn't, and everybody who's not in your book is. So there's no one really kind of hidden in this book. But for right now, it's no book. My answer to that question is that I'm actually all the characters, because I am. They're all different facets of me. Leah, there's a ton of me in Leah. There's some of me in Robert, and there's actually some of me in each of the daughters in their own ways. But it's something that they kind of like think about. So it's interesting. I just heard that their teachers might actually be reading part of it, and so I'm going to actually have to see how that goes over. My 15-year-old, who's a very enterprising child, took the ARC, the ARC, the advanced copy, swiped it when it came from the mail. I didn't even know she had and read it. And I was like, and I said, like, no one's going to read this. That's not allowed. And she was like, no. And then she brought it back. She's like, yeah, it's not bad. So does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yes.
Are you writing full time now?
No, I teach and write. So I'm a teacher who moonlights as a writer, or I'm a writer who moonlights as a teacher. Or right now I'm a book tour author. So it's I don't know. I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Go Panthers! And I do like being in the classroom. The students really kind of wake me up. As another writer put it, students bring you the news, and so it's kind of a valuable way to keep my batteries charged. Although, as Stephen King said, he taught middle school, I think, for a while. And he said, teaching is like hooking jumper cables up to your head. As only Stephen King would say. And there's an element of that, like, if I look tired, it's because, like, I've just come from a lot of grading and things like that. But I don't know. I think if I just wrote, I need to mix out in the world a little bit more. But who knows? We'll see. If this book does really well, my students can come visit me in Paris. Or Scottsdale.
Come visit you in Scottsdale,
well,
right, in the winter.
I'll be one of those people on there who their jacket flap, he divides his time, the time between Scottsdale and Paris.
Sounds great. Well, this has really been a pleasure. I realize all too late here that many of you have not been to the store before, so let me apologize. I should have started out by introducing myself. I'm Barbara Peters. The Poison Pen is in its 29th year now. Thank you. I've lost my train of thought. And we do this virtually every night. We actually do about 300 events a year, and they're all more or less like that, although we don't always have such a charming author, but most authors really are in their own different ways. Delightful, but, well, it's true. You know, I mean, they're all different personalities, and some authors regard doing this as torture, and some authors clearly, like the gentleman to my right, absolutely love it. But then he's used to addressing classes full of, so he's more comfortable with this. But writers, you know, are essentially people who live in small rooms for large parts of their lives, and you know, kind of like your monk, and so they're not always comfortable on tour. So that's how we've evolved this format, where it's really more like an evening out at the theater or something, you know, and to be honest, the book is your ticket. So I thank you all for remembering to do that and to buy them. So to thank you for coming tonight and for, in fact, buying books. Those of you who bought one will have a numbered ticket inside. And I thought long and hard about what book I was going to give away this evening as a reward, an advanced reading copy, and I come up with the perfect book for you. It's called The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and Natural History, The Heist of the Century. So it's got everything in it. It's got travel, it's got science, it's got theft, and all the rest of it. And a cool June evening in 2009, after performing a concert at London's Royal Academy of Music, 20-year-old American flautist Edwin Rist boarded a train for a suburban outpost of the British Museum of Natural History, where he stole all kinds of specimens, destroyed scientific evidence, and the whole bit. When he was finally caught, I won't tell you why they let him off, but you probably won't feel very sympathetic. But anyway, it all ties in, strangely enough, to fly fishing, why you would want to have 200 bird carcasses complete with feathers, and all kinds of fascinating things. There's a great review of the Wall Street Journal all over the place, and I enjoyed this a lot. It doesn't go on sale till April 24th, so whoever gets this lovely book will be able to have bragging rights, and you can enjoy it. What number are we dealing with up there, guys?
21.
Sorry? 21. Great. So I would like you, sir, to pick a number between 1 and 21, and that lucky person will get to go home with a feather
Between 1
thief.
and 21.
That's right.
17.
It's you! Congratulations. Great. All right. So I will give this to you. Please give Liam a round of applause. He's done so much. And I would like to add that we have a wonderful newsletter. I say